Have you ever wondered why there are stories in the Bible that have been hidden, secrets that few people know about? Today, we will explore one of the most mysterious stories, the story of angels who abandoned heaven because of their fleshly desires for humans. Imagine this: divine beings, created to serve God, being tempted by the beauty of the daughters of men to the point of willingly giving up their divine position. This is not mythology or fiction. This is a story recorded in ancient texts, a story that many believe has been hidden from the public because of its profound implications. The story of the Grigori, the Watcher Angels, is not just a historical record, but a mirror reflecting human nature, temptation, and the consequences of going against God's will. Grigori, also known as the Watchers, were a special group of angels entrusted by God with the task of observing humanity. Their name, Grigori, has roots in ancient Hebrew, meaning those who are awake, or the watchmen. This is not a trivial name, but a sacred title reflecting the high mission that the Creator had entrusted to them. This story appears primarily in the Book of Enoch, an ancient text not included in the canonical Bible of most churches, but considered canonical in some religious traditions. Nevertheless, traces of this story still appear in the Bible, especially in the book of Genesis, which mentions sons of God marrying daughters of men and giving birth to the Nephilim giants. Why is this story rarely mentioned? Perhaps because it challenges conventional notions about angels, or because of its implications about the nature of sin and the fall. But today, we will delve into this story, uncovering truths that have been hidden through time. The story of the Grigori angels is not just a distant tale from the past. It reflects the inner battle that each of us experiences, the battle between duty and desire, between what is right and temptation. Think about it. If even angels, divine beings with superior power and intelligence, could fall because of fleshly desires, then how must we, humans with our weaker nature, face such challenges? This story is not just a lesson about pride and desire, but a warning about the consequences of going against God's will. But at the same time, it also brings us hope. For if God could forgive mankind after the sin of Adam and Eve, if he could redeem us through the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, then no sin is too great to be forgiven, no fall too deep to be rescued. As we explore the story of the Grigori angels, I invite you not just to listen as a historical account, but to reflect on the lessons it brings to your own life. Ask yourself, what are the fleshly desires tempting you? What choices are you struggling with? And how can you stand firm against these temptations? Join me as we delve into this hidden biblical story, the story of the Grigori angels, those who abandoned heaven because of fleshly desires, and the lessons we can learn from their fall. In the heavenly hierarchy, the Grigori occupy a special position. Their name, Grigori, originates from ancient Hebrew, meaning those who are awake, or the watchmen. This is not an ordinary title, but a sacred designation, reflecting the high mission that the Creator had entrusted to them. God created the Grigori with the primary purpose of observing and protecting humanity. They were sent to earth not to directly intervene in human affairs, but to watch, record, and report all developments back to the Most High. They were divinely witnesses, God's eyes on earth, ensuring that His will was carried out. In the angelic hierarchy system, the Grigori stood at a special position, not ordinary angels, but also not among the highest ranks of seraphim or cherubim. They were powerful messengers, granted superior intelligence and a profound ability to understand human nature. This position allowed them to perform their observational duties without being drawn into earthly emotions and desires, at least according to the original plan. The mission of the Grigori was divine and important. They were the bridge between heaven and earth, between the Creator and His creation. They were tasked with monitoring the development of humanity, recording achievements and failures, and reporting back to God. This was a noble responsibility requiring absolute objectivity and unconditional loyalty. The story of the Grigori angels is not merely legend, but is recorded in many ancient texts, especially in the Book of Enoch, a pseudepigraphical work written around the Talmud century BCA. Although not included in the canonical Bible of most churches, the Book of Enoch is still considered canonical in some religious traditions, such as the Ethiopian Church. In the first Book of Enoch, chapters 6 and describe in detail the fall of Kaksisata Grigori angels under the leadership of Samyaza. They were enchanted by the beauty of the daughters of men and decided to abandon heaven to marry them. This book also lists the names of Kaksikummen, main Grigori leaders, and describes the forbidden knowledge they taught to humans. Although not directly appearing in the canonical Bible, traces of this story can still be found in Genesis Kusi, Uxinelia, when human beings began to increase in number on the earth and daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw that the daughters of humans were beautiful, and they married any of them they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward when the sons of God went to the daughters of humans and had children by them. They were the heroes of old, men of renown. Many scholars believe that the sons of God in this passage refers to the Grigori angels, and the giants, Nephilim, are the children born from the union between them and the daughters of men. Additionally, in the Epistle of Jude, verse Kusi, there is also a passage, "And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains for judgment on the great day." This is believed to refer to the fate of the Grigori angels after they fell. The Grigori angels possess supernatural abilities far beyond human understanding. They were not bound by physical limitations as we are. They could move between realms, from heaven to earth and back again. They had the ability to shapeshift, exist in various forms, and even become invisible to the naked eye. The intelligence of the Grigori far surpassed that of humans. They held knowledge about the universe, about stars and celestial bodies, about weather and seasons, about medicine and herbs, about metals and precious stones. They understood the art of war, magic and spells, music and art. This was knowledge that later, when they fell, they taught to humans, an act considered a violation of the divine order. The relationship between the Grigori and God was initially one of absolute reverence and obedience. They were created to serve him, to carry out his will, and to report all developments on earth. They stood before the throne of the Most High, witnessed his glory, and enjoyed blessings from his presence. The responsibility of the Grigori toward humanity was to observe and protect, not to intervene or change. They were assigned to monitor human development, record achievements and failures, but were not permitted to directly impact the course of history. They were watchers, not participants. It was the violation of this boundary when they were no longer content with the role of observers, but wanted to directly participate in human life that led to their fall. They crossed the divine boundary, abandoned their noble position, and traded heavenly glory for earthly pleasures. This was a betrayal not only to God, but also to their own angelic nature. The fall of the Grigori is a cosmic tragedy, an event that changed the course of human history and left consequences that continue to this day. It is the story of how the noblest beings can become the most corrupt, of how watchers became violators, and of how angels became the fallen ones. When assigned the task of observing humanity, the Grigori angels began a journey no one could have anticipated. Initially, they performed their mission seriously, monitoring each step of human development from afar. But gradually, that distance narrowed. From observers, they became admirers. The beauty of the daughters of men enchanted these angels. It wasn't just physical beauty, but also their vibrancy, freedom, and intense emotions, things that the angels, with their divine and pure nature, had never experienced. They began to long to feel, to touch, to love, in the way humans did. Each passing day, the temptation grew stronger. The Grigori angels began comparing their heavenly life with the earthly life of humans. Heaven with its perfection, order, and eternity suddenly seemed boring compared to the human world full of changes, emotions, and discoveries. They began questioning their position about the boundary between observing and participating. An intense internal struggle took place within each angel. On one side was loyalty to God, to the divine mission they were entrusted with. On the other side was the desire to experience, to live like humans, to love and be loved. They were torn between duty and desire, between heaven and earth, between eternity and the momentary. This wasn't a simple temptation, but an identity crisis. The Grigori angels began to ask themselves, who are they? What is their purpose of existence? Why must they only observe and not participate? Why must they give up emotions and experiences that humans freely enjoy? Among the Grigori angels, Samyaza emerged as a leader. He not only felt the temptation, but also saw an opportunity to change destiny, to rewrite the rules, to create a new order where angels could choose their own lives. On Mount Hermon, a towering mountain between the boundary of heaven and earth, Samyaza summoned kaksisata Grigori angels. In a tense and exciting atmosphere, he proposed a bold plan. Abandon heaven, descend to earth, take the daughters of men as wives, and live as mortals. Brothers, Samyaza spoke, his voice echoing through the air. We have observed humans for too long. We know everything about them, but are not allowed to experience their lives. We have witnessed their love, joy, sorrow, but have never felt them. It's time we change that. Samyaza's proposal caused a wave of debate. Some angels feared the consequences, reminding of responsibility and loyalty to God. But many others, already tired of the observer role, eagerly supported this plan. Finally, Samyaza made an oath, an irrevocable commitment. Let us swear upon this Mount Hermon. We will descend to earth, take the daughters of men as wives, and accept all consequences of this decision. We will unite. No one will abandon anyone. No one will turn their back on this agreement. 199 remaining angels joined Samyaza in the oath. They knew this was an act of betrayal, a violation of divine order. But desire had overwhelmed reason. Lust had obscured duty. The plan was executed quickly. 200 Grigori angels abandoned their positions in heaven, descending to earth in human form. They brought with them knowledge, power, and secrets of heaven, things never meant for humans to know. The immediate consequence of this decision was disruption in the cosmic order. Heaven lost its watchers, earth received beings that didn't belong here. The boundary between divine and secular was blurred, creating an unprecedented chaos. God, with his comprehensive vision, witnessed everything. He did not intervene immediately, did not stop the fallen angels. Instead, he allowed free will to play out, allowed the natural consequences of choice to manifest. This wasn't indifference, but part of a greater plan, a lesson about freedom, responsibility, and consequences. When the Grigori angels appeared among humans, they caused a shock. With beautiful appearances, extraordinary strength, and superior intelligence, they quickly became objects of admiration and desire. The daughters of men, enchanted by these superhuman beings, willingly married them. Marriages between angels and humans took place everywhere. This wasn't just a physical union, but an intersection between two worlds, two completely different natures. Angels brought heavenly knowledge and power. Humans contributed emotions and earthly experiences. The result was a hybrid generation of children, belonging neither to heaven nor entirely to earth. Nephilim, the children born from this union, were giants in both physical and spiritual aspects. The Book of Genesis describes them as giants, heroes of old, men of renown. They inherited the strength and intelligence of their fathers, the angels, but also carried within them the strong desires and emotions of their mothers, humans. The Nephilim quickly became a formidable force on earth. With superior size and strength, they easily imposed their will on ordinary humans. They became rulers, tyrants, creating a new social order based on power and fear. Not only that, the Grigori angels also taught humans forbidden knowledge, secrets of heaven never meant for humans to know. The Book of Enoch lists in detail this knowledge. Azazel taught humans how to forge weapons and jewelry. Semyaza taught magic and spells. Armoros taught how to break spells. Barakiel taught astronomy. Kokabel taught about constellations. Ezekiel taught about clouds and weather. Arakiel taught about earth signs. Shamsiel taught about sun signs. Sariel taught about the moon's cycle. This knowledge, though valuable, came too early to mankind. They weren't morally mature enough to use it wisely. The result was an increase in violence, greed, and corruption. Humans began using new knowledge to make weapons, wage wars, and oppress each other. They used magic and spells to manipulate nature and fellow humans. They created jewelry and luxuries, leading to wealth disparity and material competition. God's reaction to this violation was divinely wrath. He could not let this situation continue. The union between angels and humans had created a lineage not in his plan. Forbidden knowledge had been taught too early, leading to abuse and corruption. The natural order had been disrupted, and the balance between heaven and earth had been broken. God decided to intervene. He could not allow the fallen angels to continue defiling his creation. He could not let the Nephilim continue to dominate and oppress humans. And above all, he could not let forbidden knowledge continue to be spread and misused. This was the moment when God had to demonstrate his supreme power, to restore order, to punish the betrayers, and to salvage what remained of his creation. When the Grigori angels united with the daughters of men, they created an unprecedented upheaval in human history. The Nephilim, the hybrid children between angels and humans, appeared as a new race, superior in both physical and intellectual aspects. With height far exceeding ordinary people, extraordinary strength, and extended longevity, they quickly became dominant figures on earth. The Book of Enoch describes the Nephilim as giants 300 cubits tall, about satakol mekumentavis meters, a number that may be exaggerated in the style of ancient literature, but certainly reflects their astonishing size. These beings were not only different in appearance, but also carried within them a mixture of heavenly and earthly nature, a combination never intended by God. The Nephilim quickly imposed their power over humanity. With superior strength, they proclaimed themselves kings and lords, forcing humans to submit and worship them. They built vast kingdoms, magnificent architectural structures that ordinary humans could not accomplish. Many scholars believe that ancient mysterious constructions, like the pyramids or the massive stone blocks at Baalbek, might be the legacy of this era. But the truly dangerous influence of the Nephilim was not their physical strength, but their spiritual and moral impact. They introduced a new social model where might was the only law, where the weak must submit to the strong. They taught humans to worship violence, war, and power. They encouraged class division, creating an unjust society where the majority had to serve a privileged minority. Parallel to the emergence of the Nephilim was the Grigori angels' transmission of forbidden knowledge to mankind. This wasn't ordinary knowledge, but heavenly secrets never meant for humans to know. The Book of Enoch lists in detail this knowledge. Azazel taught humans how to forge weapons from metal, how to make swords, knives, shields, and armor. He also taught them how to make mirrors, jewelry, and cosmetics, leading to the development of pride and material desires. Semyaza taught magic and spells, knowledge of the spiritual world that humans weren't ready to possess. Armoros taught how to break spells, creating a spiritual arms race between those who used magic and those who fought against it. Barakiel taught astronomy, helping humans understand the stars, but also leading to the worship of celestial bodies instead of the Creator. Kokabel taught about constellations. Ezekiel taught about clouds and weather. Arakiel taught about earth signs. Shamsiel taught about sun signs. and Sariel taught about the moon's cycle. This knowledge, though valuable, came too early to mankind. They weren't morally mature enough to use it wisely. The result was an increase in violence, greed, and corruption. Humans began using new knowledge to make weapons, wage wars, and oppress each other. They used magic and spells to manipulate nature and fellow humans. They created jewelry and luxury items, leading to wealth disparity and material competition. The earth gradually became a place filled with crime and violence. Genesis Suis, VC describes, "The Lord saw how great the wickedness of the human race had become on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of the human heart was only evil all the time." This was no longer the world that God had created and declared good. God, with his comprehensive vision, witnessed all developments on earth. He saw the corruption of the Grigori angels, the emergence of the Nephilim, and the increase of sin in humanity. This was not the plan he had intended for his creation. The divine order had been overturned, and the balance between heaven and earth had been broken. God decided to intervene. The first and most terrible punishment was the Great Flood, a global deluge sent to cleanse the earth of impurity and sin. Genesis Kusi. Satan records God's decision. "I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race. I have created, and with them the animals, the birds and the creatures that move along the ground, for I regret that I have made them." The Great Flood was not just a natural phenomenon, but a divine act of judgment. The waters rose, covering even the highest mountains, wiping out all traces of the old civilization. The Nephilim, with all their strength and pride, could not resist the power of nature when controlled by the Creator. They were swept away, along with most of humanity. Only Noah and his family, described as righteous in his generation, were saved through the ark that God had instructed him to build. They became the seed for a new humanity, a fresh start untainted by the influence of the Nephilim. But the Great Flood was only the punishment for the earth and the creatures living on it. The Grigori angels who had initiated all of this faced a different, more severe fate. According to the Book of Enoch, God sent the archangel Raphael to bind Azazel and cast him into darkness. He commanded, "Bind his hands and feet and cast him into darkness. Make an opening in the desert of Dudale and cast him therein. Place upon him rough and jagged rocks and cover him with darkness. There shall he remain forever, and cover his face, that he may not see light." The other Grigori angels also suffered similar fates. They were bound in the dark abyss, awaiting the day of final judgment. The Epistle of Jude, verse Kusi in the New Testament seems to allude to this. "And the angels who did not keep their positions of authority, but abandoned their proper dwelling, these he has kept in darkness, bound with everlasting chains, for judgment on the great day." This was an especially severe punishment. Angels, created to live in the light and glory of God, were now imprisoned in eternal darkness. They, who once freely moved between heaven and earth, were now bound, unable to move. They who had chosen fleshly desires over holiness now no longer had the ability to feel anything. Although the Grigori angels were punished and the Nephilim were wiped out in the Great Flood, their spiritual legacy still exists to this day. The story of their fall has become an important part of humanity's religious and cultural heritage, providing profound lessons about the nature of sin, temptation, and consequences. One of the most important legacies is the concept of sin and temptation. The story of the Grigori angels shows that even the most divine beings can fall if they allow desire to override duty. This reminds us that no one, regardless of position, is immune to temptation. We must all be vigilant and control our desires. The story also teaches us about the danger of pride. The Grigori angels, with all their power and wisdom, believed they could transcend the limits God had set without facing consequences. They overestimated their abilities and underestimated the seriousness of violating divine law. Pride led them to downfall. just as it led Lucifer to downfall before them. The story of the Grigori also has connections to the story of Lucifer, Satan. Both were angels who chose to betray God for different reasons. Lucifer because of pride and wanting to be equal with God, the Grigori because of fleshly desires and wanting to experience human life. Both suffered severe punishment, but in different ways. Lucifer was cast out of heaven but still allowed to operate, though limited, until the day of final judgment, while the Grigori angels were imprisoned immediately. This difference may reflect the different nature of their sins. Lucifer's sin was directly against God, while the Grigori's sin was against the natural order and defiled God's creation. Both are serious, but perhaps the Grigori's sin caused more immediate and direct consequences for the earth and humanity, requiring a quick and decisive response from God. The story of the Grigori angels also leaves a rich cultural legacy. Images of fallen angels, of love between heavenly beings and humans, of hybrid children between two worlds, have appeared in countless works of literature, art, and modern entertainment. From John Milton's Paradise Lost to modern films and comics about angels and demons, this story continues to captivate human imagination. But most importantly, the story of the Grigori reminds us of the importance of living true to the purpose for which we were created. These angels chose to abandon their divine position to pursue earthly desires, and as a result, they lost everything. This is a powerful lesson about seeking and maintaining the true purpose of life, about not trading eternal things for momentary pleasures. The story of the Grigori angels is not just an ancient historical page, but reflects a struggle that takes place daily in each person's soul. Even in today's modern world with advanced technology and fast-paced lifestyles, humans still face temptations similar to those angels of old. Look around. We live in a society where everything encourages instant gratification. Advertisements, movies, social media constantly send us messages. Do what you want. You deserve to indulge. Why wait when you can have it now? These messages are no different from the whispers that the Grigori angels heard when they looked down upon earth and longed for the beauty of the daughters of men. Every day, we all face decisions: follow duty or indulge desire, follow the right path or choose the easy shortcut, stand firm in principles or yield to temptation. These are not simple choices, especially when society often glorifies personal satisfaction over sacrifice for what is right. How can we recognize and deal with temptation in today's era? First, we need to understand that temptation usually comes under an attractive disguise. It rarely appears as something clearly wrong. Instead, it's often disguised as an opportunity, a new experience, or even a right that we deserve to enjoy. Just as the Grigori angels convinced themselves they deserved to experience human love and joy, we too often justify our wrong choices. Second, we need to recognize that every decision has consequences. The Grigori angels did not foresee the terrible consequences of abandoning their heavenly position. Similarly, we often only see the short-term pleasure without recognizing the long-term harm our decisions might cause. Finally, we need to build a solid value system and remain consistent with it. When facing temptation, ask yourself, does this align with my core values? How will I feel about this decision after a year, 5 years, or 10 years? If everyone acted as I do, would the world become better or worse? Another important lesson from the Grigori story is the relationship between power and responsibility. These angels possessed strength and knowledge far beyond humans, but they abused these privileges to satisfy personal desires rather than serve a higher purpose. In today's world, we witness countless examples of power abuse, from political leaders using their positions for personal enrichment to corporate executives sacrificing the company's long-term interests to achieve short-term profits, or even social media influencers spreading misinformation to attract attention. The Grigori story reminds us that power is not a privilege, it's a responsibility. When we are entrusted with power, Whether large or small, we have an obligation to use it wisely and ethically. This applies to every area of life, from how we lead at work, how we raise our children, to how we interact with others on social media. The consequences of power abuse often extend far beyond the abuser. When the Grigori angels taught forbidden knowledge to humans, they not only violated God's command, but also triggered a chain of events leading to increased violence and corruption on earth. Similarly, when those with power in modern society act for personal interest rather than common good, the consequences often spread widely, affecting countless innocent people. Responsibility comes with privilege. This is a principle that every healthy society must follow. Those who enjoy the most privileges, whether financial, educational, social status, or political power, must also bear the greatest responsibility for community welfare. When this principle is broken, when those with power use their positions to enrich themselves rather than serve others, society begins to collapse, just as the world before the Great Flood collapsed under the influence of the Nephilim. Beyond the practical lessons about temptation and power, the story of the Grigori angels carries a deep spiritual meaning about the nature of sin, the possibility of redemption, and the relationship between humans and the Creator. The fall of the Grigori illustrates a painful truth. No one, no matter how noble, is immune to sin. If even angels, beings created to serve God, could fall, then humans with their weaker nature are even more susceptible to temptation. This is not to discourage us, but to remind us of the necessity of humility and constant vigilance. At the same time, the story also shows God's mercy and justice. Although he punished the fallen angels and wiped out most of humanity that had been corrupted, he still saved Noah and his family, the righteous who remained. This shows that even when faced with widespread sin, God still seeks and protects those who remain faithful to him. In the modern context, when many people feel distant from traditional religion and skeptical about Bible stories, the Grigori story still provides valuable lessons. It reminds us that there are forces beyond our understanding, that our choices have consequences beyond what we can see, and that there is a fundamental moral order we should follow, not just out of fear of punishment, but because it is the path to a truly complete and meaningful life. The story also brings hope. If God could create a new beginning from the ruins of the pre-flawed world, then no situation is too desperate, no sin too great to be forgiven and redeemed. This is a message that all of us, regardless of religious belief or cultural background, can find comfort and inspiration in. In a world full of division and conflict, where the line between right and wrong is often blurred, the story of the Grigori angels reminds us of the importance of maintaining ethical principles, of the consequences of placing personal desires above common responsibility, and of the possibility of redemption even after the greatest failures. The story of the Grigori angels, divine beings who fell because of fleshly desires, has been pushed to the margins of orthodox doctrine through many centuries. It is not by chance that these historical pages have been hidden from public view. There are deep reasons, complex motives, behind keeping this story secret. First, the content of the story creates difficult to resolve contradictions with some established doctrines. The image of angels, traditionally considered perfect, pure, and unable to fall after Lucifer's rebellion, suddenly becomes much more complex. If angels can be tempted by fleshly desires, this raises questions about their true nature. Are they really morally different from humans, or do they only differ in power and position? Moreover, this story complicates the issue of the origin of sin. In Orthodox theology, sin is often attributed to the fall of Adam and Eve, or Lucifer's rebellion. But the Grigori story introduces another source of sin, the mixing between angels and humans, creating a hybrid lineage, not part of God's original plan. This raises difficult questions about moral responsibility and the fairness of the Great Flood. Another issue is the authenticity of the texts recording this story. The Book of Enoch, the main source of the Grigori story, was not included in the canonical Bible of most churches. Although quoted in the New Testament, Epistle of Jude, and considered canonical by some groups like the Ethiopian Church, most theologians consider it apocryphal, a text not inspired by God. These debates about authenticity have made many religious leaders cautious when referring to the Grigori story. Rather than facing difficult questions and potential contradictions, they chose to focus on clearer parts of the Bible, parts that don't cause as much controversy and are easier to explain to believers. Besides theological reasons, there are social and cultural factors contributing to the concealment of the Grigori angels story. One of the main reasons is the sensitive content about the relationship between angels and humans. The story describes angels being tempted by the beauty of the daughters of men, abandoning heaven to marry and have children with them. In many historical periods, especially the Middle Ages and Victorian era, descriptions of sexual desire, even when presented in a religious context, were often considered inappropriate for public morality. Teaching about angels falling because of fleshly desires might be seen as encouraging impure thoughts or weakening belief in the perfection of heavenly beings. Furthermore, this story challenges established religious power structures. It suggests that even beings created by God and entrusted with divine missions can betray and go against His will. In a society where church power was based on the belief that religious leaders represent God's will, the story of angels' betrayal could be seen as a dangerous precedent, encouraging doubt and challenges to religious authority. Another factor is the difficulty of the story for the general public. The Grigori story involves complex concepts about cosmology, theology, and ancient history. It requires listeners to have background knowledge about ancient religious traditions, angelic hierarchy, and texts outside the Bible. For ordinary people, these details can be confusing or difficult to access. In the context of missionary work and religious education, religious leaders often prioritize stories and doctrines that are easy to understand and can be directly applied to believers' daily lives. The Grigori story, with all its complexity and profound implications, might be seen as too difficult to effectively communicate to the general public. Despite being hidden for many centuries, the story of the Grigori angels is gradually being rediscovered in the modern era. This revival is not just the result of historical curiosity, but also reflects a change in how we approach ancient religious texts and forgotten stories. Modern research on ancient texts has brought new insights about the Book of Enoch and related materials. Scholars no longer focus only on determining the orthodoxy of these texts, but are also interested in their historical, literary, and spiritual value. They recognize that even texts not considered canonical can provide valuable insights into the beliefs and religious practices of ancient communities. The development of the internet and digital media has also contributed to the wider dissemination of knowledge about apocryphal texts and hidden stories. Today, anyone with an internet connection can access translations of the Book of Enoch, scholarly research on the Grigori, and countless discussions on this topic. This has democratized religious knowledge, allowing people to discover and evaluate these stories for themselves, rather than relying entirely on religious leaders' interpretations. Moreover, modern society has become more open to discussing complex and sometimes controversial topics in religion. We no longer avoid difficult questions about the origin of sin, the nature of heavenly beings, or the dark parts of religious history. Instead, many believe that confronting these questions can enrich spiritual life and bring a deeper understanding of their faith. The importance of fully understanding religious history cannot be underestimated. When we discover hidden stories like the Grigori story, we not only expand our knowledge of the past, but also have an opportunity to reconsider our current doctrines and beliefs. We can question why some stories were included in the Bible while others were excluded, and this can lead to a deeper understanding of the formation and development process of religious traditions. Finally, the story of the Grigori angels has great value in understanding human nature. It is not just a story about heavenly beings, but a mirror reflecting ourselves, about the struggle between duty and desire, about the consequences of going against God's will, and about the possibility of redemption even after the greatest mistakes. In an age when many people are searching for meaning and purpose in life, this story provides valuable lessons about choice, responsibility, and consequences. The journey of discovering the story of the Grigori angels has taken us through many profound aspects of a hidden divine history. From their noble origins as watchers trusted by God, to their tragic fall due to fleshly desires, this story reflects a cosmic tragedy with far-reaching consequences that extend to the present day. We have seen how these angels, created to observe and protect humanity, gradually became enchanted by the beauty of the daughters of men. Under Samuel's leadership, Kaksisata angels swore an oath on Mount Hermon, deciding to abandon heaven to unite with humans. The result was the birth of the Nephilim, giant hybrids between angels and humans, along with the teaching of forbidden knowledge to mankind. The consequences of this betrayal were catastrophic. The earth sank into violence and corruption, forcing God to intervene through the great flood, wiping out most of humanity and imprisoning the fallen angels in the dark abyss. Only Noah and his family, the righteous ones, were saved to begin anew. This story is not just a historical record, but contains profound lessons about the nature of temptation, the relationship between power and responsibility, and the consequences of going against God's will. It reminds us that no one, no matter how noble, is immune to temptation, and that every decision carries inevitable consequences. As the story of the Grigori angels concludes, I invite you to pause for a moment to reflect on its meaning in your own life. Ask yourself, what are the Grigori in my life, the things I've been entrusted to God, the responsibilities I need to fulfill? And what are the daughters of men, the temptations that might cause me to abandon my position? Each of us faces daily choices between duty and desire, between what is right and what is easy, between long-term purpose and short-term pleasure. The Grigori story reminds us of the importance of these choices, how they shape not only our lives, but also affect those around us. Reflect on the moral boundaries in your life. What are the limits you should not cross? What are the principles you need to uphold, regardless of how strong the temptation might be? The Grigori angels crossed the boundary between heaven and earth, between observing and participating, and they paid a heavy price. This lesson still holds value in the modern world, where the line between right and wrong is often blurred. I also invite you to reflect on the power of forgiveness and redemption. Although the Grigori angels were severely punished, their story takes place within the larger context of God's love and mercy. He saved Noah and his family, allowing humanity a fresh start. This reminds us that no sin is too great to be forgiven, no fault too deep to be rescued. As we end our journey exploring the story of the Grigori angels, I want to leave you with a message of hope and warning. This story, though full of tragedy, still contains seeds of hope, hope that even after the greatest mistakes, there can be a new beginning. God did not abandon his creation. Even when he had to punish the fallen angels and wipe out most of humanity, he still preserved a seed for the future. Through Noah and his family, humanity was reborn. Through Jesus Christ, many centuries later, the path of redemption was opened for all who believe. This is a powerful reminder of the power of choice. The Grigori angels chose to abandon their divine position because of fleshly desires, and they suffered the consequences. But we, each day, have the opportunity to choose differently, to choose what is right instead of what is easy, to choose duty over desire, to choose love over selfishness. True power lies not in the ability to do as one pleases, but in the ability to control those desires. The Grigori angels, with all their power, failed to control their desires. But we, though much weaker, can succeed where they failed, not through our own strength, but by relying on God's power. As you leave this story, carry with you not just knowledge about a hidden divine history, but also the determination to live a life faithful to your purpose, steadfast in your principles, and always remembering that every choice has consequences, not just for you, but for those around you and for future generations. The story of the Grigori angels is not just a story about the past. It is a mirror reflecting the present and a warning for the future. Learn from their mistakes and choose a different path, the path of faithfulness, integrity, and love. God bless you.